On this episode of How It's Done, we're going to be talking to former member Mark C. Bryan of the Restored Church of God in Wadsworth, Ohio. Since its founding in 1999 and the building of the church on 261 and 76 in Wadsworth, Ohio, a lot of people have had questions. And if you look anywhere on social media, every so often, several times a year, there are a bunch of people with questions. Now, I know a lot of people are going to be like, what is the deal with somebody that is a former member of a church? Because it happens all the time. And we're going to be answering some of those questions for you today. A lot of people have had questions. I would say more so because the church comes off mysterious to some people because there's gates, because a lot of people don't understand specifically what the Restored Church of God believes in. And the fact that the church originated in 1999 up on 94 in a building, and then all of a sudden this big, beautiful building pops up next to Giant Eagle. And so what we're going to be doing today, I asked a lot of questions out on social media for you all to go ahead and ask questions to us so we can get them answered. Get a lot of questions going in reference to stereotypes, things about the city in regards to money. We're going to go ahead and get those answered today the best we can. Now, we're going to be giving a backstory on a few other episodes because in doing my research with Mark, discovered this is a bigger topic, not so much specifically just on the Restored Church of God, but on its origins of the Worldwide Church of God that came out of California with Herbert Armstrong. And since the church ended, there's been a bunch of splinter churches that have popped up all across the country. And so we're going to go ahead and try to get some of your questions answered for you. Thank you for joining me today. And could you give me a little bit of a backstory how you came to Wadsworth, Ohio? Because you're originally from California, correct?
That's correct. It started back in 2008 when what we come to understand is a calling where God opens up your mind to His Word and His truth.
Okay.
And I was a-religious before. I would say I was more agnostic and a spiritualist, but I wasn't religious at all. So Christianity had no interest to me, but I suddenly found myself being interested in reading the Bible and understanding God's Word. And by doing so, I realized that the Ten Commandments were still in effect, that I needed to start obeying them, and I needed to find a church that taught what the Bible teaches.
Okay.
While I was living in Oakland, California at the time, I began attending with the United Church of God,
Okay.
which is also one of the splinter groups that split off from the Worldwide Church of God, which I didn't really know about at all. Herbert Armstrong, never even heard his name before. And I attended there for 3 years. I was baptized, and while I was there, I knew something was off, like I didn't feel good about the teachings, and then I found the Restored Church of God and David C. Pack through his World to Come broadcast on YouTube.
Okay, so he has displayed things across the internet to reach other people besides just within the Wadsworth, Ohio community,
correct? It's a worldwide organization. They have a website, rcg.org. They have like hundreds of books and booklets, lots of literature, and dozens and dozens of videos on World to Come. And while I was attending United, I realized this man is speaking in a different way that I hadn't heard before. He made the Bible more interesting than what I was hearing. Mm-hmm. And eventually I contacted RCG, asked for a minister to come meet with me. He did. After some counseling, I left UCG, attended RCG, and then within a couple of months, because of my background as a video editor and videographer, and World to Come was ramping up to become a worldwide presence on television, broadcast television. They needed a professional to come in and help them who had broadcast experience, and so they invited me to move to Wadsworth to be here at headquarters, which I did in December of 2012, and I was an employee until March of 2021.
Okay, so you were an employee. How, one thing that we want to get out of the way first is that you had to sign a non-disclosure as an employee, correct?
That's correct.
Now, do regular members have to sign a non-disclosure?
If they do any volunteer work for the church, then yes, everybody signs the same non-disclosure agreement. But based on what we're covering today, it shouldn't be an issue because that has to do with the back end, how to, business, finances. which I don't have knowledge of anyway, so I can't even answer the question even if I wanted to.
Okay, so I just wanted to show this. I know a lot of you have extra questions that we won't be able to touch, but besides him not really being in that area to discuss it because of this, he doesn't really know. So if you do run into certain former members, there are reasons why that they can't ask that for legal reasons. The other question I have for you, do you at this point in time fear for your life for the fact that you're being here and talking, or are worried about the backlash from David Pack or any members?
There's no fear. They're not dangerous people.
Okay.
I'm not worried about them hurting anybody or threatening. They don't do that.
Okay.
So I'm not worried about it. Why people don't speak, why former ministers who have left don't speak, that's their personal choice to not speak, and everybody has different reasons.
Are there armored guards on the property? I know that they have the 2 gates, and there has been speculation, rumors that there are armed guards that will run you off the property. Is this true? Do they have firearms on the property?
No. Nobody is armed. The quote-unquote security guards are accountants and gardeners who volunteer to be on guard duty. There is some, sometimes it's a vendor or somebody's turned the wrong way or something that they need to be ushered off the campus or away from the front gate. But nobody's with a gun anywhere on RCG, and I've seen online the rumors of, oh, my friend delivered a package in an armed guard. It's like, no, that's not true. That's impossible. It's just not possible.
Now, there's a security system.
Sure.
So if there's a security system, and I know some churches obviously have them, but some people feel that the security system is all throughout the trees and everything else. If there is a security system, why?
Well, like any business operating anywhere or corporate structure, it's just for safety and legal reasons. If you have a break-in, you want a recording, people now have cameras at home in their garages and the sides of their house.
Yes.
Even my own dad started doing that like 2 years ago. So it's not unusual to have a camera system in place just in case something happens. You want to give to the police, this person was trespassing, this person stole a car. So that's the reason there's security. Now, keep in mind, they do monitor, like people are walking their dogs on the campus when there's a sign that clearly says private property.
Okay.
Is it the bad church not wanting their dogs to poop on the lawn, or is it the person who's willfully, I see the sign, but I don't care, I'm going to walk here? You're left to make your own judgment on that.
Now, here's a big one. Have you been hired? Are you planted to come and give this interview, this talk in regards to making RCG look good or throw us off on anything?
I am no longer employed by RCG, and no, they're not putting me up to this, which in my looking at the Facebook questions and answering the questions, people said, oh, he's a mole, because I'm not out to bash or destroy them or take them down. Like, I could do that anyways. I'm just one person. And I was more interested in going on the Facebook group, which sparked all of this, to answer questions that, quite frankly, the church should have been doing on their own years ago. And as a member, I was like, why aren't we telling people this stuff is crazy? It's not true. So I just wanted to answer the questions. And I really feel like people are going to be disappointed and bored with all this, because it's like the great conspiracy theory. There's no bodies buried in the garden. There's no child sacrifices going on, or any of the kind of rumors that people like to believe, because it's more comfortable to think that church is crazy and the people are bad, when in fact the members are really nice people. There are people there that I really care about that are still there. There are ministers, lay members. They're nice people.
Now, why did you agree to do this interview? I mean, you were trying to answer questions online, and I reached out to you because I felt that this has been going on for so long, and there's a lot of really, really good questions that the community and outside of the community. I mean, if you look online, there are Facebook pages, websites dedicated, I mean, psychologists dedicated to researching Restored Church of God, and sometimes we'll call it RCG, so it's short, and the Worldwide Church of God, and you're here.
Right.
Why?
I felt compelled, and I can't fully explain why, to just speak truthfully and honestly as much as I can, which is why I'm not out to bash them, but when there's certain criticisms that can be laid against them, especially the leadership and especially towards the religious teachings, I have no problem being very blunt about it, but I also feel it's important to put my name and my face with the words that are being said rather than being this anonymous source. I always find that to be very cowardly, that if you're going to speak out against or for something, you should have the moral fortitude to be able to put your name and picture with your words and say, I'll take the heat for good or for bad.
Okay. So can you explain a little bit of what's on this table as an example to show everybody?
A lot of this is the literature from the Restored Church of God that they offer for free on their websites. You can order it you can get it as a PDF and start reading immediately, or you can actually you can actually order a hard copy.
Okay.
The church doesn't charge for anything. The RCG free literature, it's all free. There's no catches, there's no gotchas with the literature, and it's basically all the different teachings on all the different types of things that they teach, from agriculture to, if you were in the Worldwide Church of God, how to transition to the Restored Church of God. There's basic books that were rewritten of what Herbert Armstrong wrote.
Okay.
That Dave Pack and his writing team, they rewrote the literature so that people who used to attend Worldwide would say, wow, I remember that booklet. Oh, it's new and fresh. And that's what the literature's for, so that you can learn about the teachings of RCG and then decide, does this make sense to me? Do I believe it? And do I want to become a member? So it's a way to sift out people who are just curious and don't believe it, or people who want to pursue and become members.
Now, how long were you a member before you started feeling that something was amiss for yourself in regards to being a member of the church?
I was fully on board with what we were teaching despite certain prophetic failures, because I was new into RCG as a new Christian, and also trying to understand that, God doesn't always work out things the way we think. You can use biblical examples of Peter denied Christ, Paul had people killed, David's family had problems. So you can't equate the mistakes, the misspeaks, or even the character of the people speaking, because there are biblical examples that God still uses these people. So for a very long time, and I'm sure a lot of members do this, you just kind of okay, well, it wasn't the way we thought, but wow, we're still learning, we're still growing. This was a test. God was shaking the tree, as it were. People who are not strong or who are going to fly away anyways, he just gets rid of them. The problem is that when you do that for 8 years in a row, you start to think, how much can you shake the tree until you kill it? There won't be any good leaves left. And so it took, I would say, about 5 years ago is when I really started going, wow, I started to question more and more what I heard. And then within the last 2 years, I knew for a fact whatever prophetic teaching was going to happen, okay, that's going to change in a week or two. Whatever timeline or date of Christ's return that David C. Pack, if you Google David Pack, you'll find the guy from Ambrosia, but it's David C. Pack. Whatever he would teach and whatever timeline and date he would set, you could rest assured it was going to fail. And it's interesting that he claims that he's an apostle, because me as a lay member would be right 100% about Dave Pack being wrong 100%.
Now, what is the specific reason why you left?
The specific reason I left was, I believe that every person has a line in the sand for themselves. You're like Popeye. That's all I can stand, and I can't stand no more. I knew that if the things that were being taught continued until Passover 2021, I knew I couldn't take the Passover there. I was also working in the video department, where I was the one taking Dave Pack's messages, editing them, and then feeding them to the brethren. So I had a role to play in his fraud, his religious fraud. And that started to bother me. It's like, the brethren I care about, I'm helping this man that I don't believe is speaking the truth speak to these people. And so it was a combination of, I've had enough of the Bible series prophecy. I could even predict what the man was going to do, and then he would do it. I'm like, okay, we're on a roller coaster. We're experiencing Groundhog Day like Bill Murray. I know it's coming down the road. How much longer can I do this anymore? And so I spent about a year saving up my money, not giving as much to the church for tithes, or not tithes 10%, but giving up my offerings and started putting a little aside as a safety net, because I knew, okay, either Christ is going to return before I leave, or I'm going to leave. And so I had to leave.
Now, You're taught when you have an issue, something wrong, that you go and talk it out. Couldn't you just go to your ministers or David Pack and talk out what was bothering you, what troubled you, so that you didn't come to the conclusion to leave? Were you able to talk to other members in regards to how you felt about David Pack being a fraud?
If you frame it that way, you're out the door. You don't frame, I think Dave Pack is a fraud. First of all, it's Mr. Pack. And you don't come with an accusational tone or accusational question, because you will get in trouble and they'll probably put you out if you do that. Can you talk to the ministers? You can, but the problem is that the prophetic teachings are such gobbledygook, they can't explain it anyways. I've actually went to my pastor, the headquarters minister at the time, when Dave Pack declared himself Elijah. And I had some serious problems with the Elijah teaching that I did my own study and went into the ministry. And both those ministers that sat with me we worked for an hour and a half for me to come around and learn it their way. Well, ironically enough, one of those very ministers left because he didn't believe that Dave Pack was Elijah. And he told me afterwards he was following the playbook of counseling. So you can go to the ministry, but the problem is if you go with the wrong questions, you become an issue. You're either suspended or put out. There's some kind of punishment involved. People are afraid to go to the ministers because they'll get in trouble. So most people don't go to the ministry, and you cannot talk to other members about your doubts. That is sowing the seeds of discord. There are Bible verses that God talks about hating those that sow discord among the brethren. If I came to you and said, wow, I didn't believe what I just heard, then you would be obligated by your conscience to report me to the ministry.
So what if you're married? You couldn't go tell your wife, or your children came to you and was like, I don't understand this. I don't agree with this. I was talking to another friend, and they can't come to you. You can't even talk to your own spouse.
Spouses talk, but they have to, and the people that I know that are married, I'm not married, they have to gently kind of dance around because they're both believers. They're both baptized. They know the same verses, so they have to be very careful about how they even approach their spouse. Like, honey, didn't you find that teaching today interesting? Yes, honey, I found that interesting. And you kind of probe. It's like, with fellow members, you can kind of probe in a very way, and if somebody's interested in talking, they'll pick up on it, and you can talk frankly at some point. But even among spouses, you have to be careful what you say, because spouses could have a crisis of conscience and report their own spouses to the ministry. Hey, my husband is being doubtful, or my wife is being doubtful.
Okay. Now, when I reached out to social media, I gathered as many questions as I could from the public. So I'm going to go over some of these with you. Answer the best that you can.
Sure.
We got a lot to try to get through here. So what exactly do you have to give up to be a member? Example, do they approach you, and is it true you have to be invited to attend?
Yes, you have to be invited to attend, but you reach out to them in the first place. RCG does not solicit members. They put out the literature, people read the literature and contact the church. And when you contact the church and say, hey, I'd like to attend, which they get a lot, a minister will then contact that person and begin discussing things with them, either on the phone or Zoom, or if they're local, go to their home and actually meet with them. And if they seem like they're receptive to the literature, that God's word makes sense, that the literature makes sense, and they agree with it, they can move forward towards being members. As far as what they have to give up, there are biblical standards of things you give up eventually. You can't be fornicating with your girlfriend. You either get married or break up before you become a member. Don't be baptized if you're smoking. No drunkenness. I mean, there's certain things that are just basic biblical principles that you would require as, quote, giving up. The one caveat to that would be if you were, let's say, worked in law enforcement, you can't be in a position where you'd ever use your gun.
Okay.
Can't be in the military.
Now, is it true you have to go through 3 interviews with 3 different people before you may receive an invitation to the service? And if so, why?
That's not standard. Usually there would be one minister who's assigned to a prospective member, is what they call them. And they would cultivate a relationship with that person, and that one person would then counsel with them before they become a member. There's no multi-stage interview other than the baptismal counseling or membership counseling. once the minister deems that this person can be invited to services, then that person is able to come to services. So you can't just say, oh, I want to attend. It's like, well, let's make sure that you're ready to attend. And then after you've been attending for a while, to prepare you for baptism.
Okay. How many members are within the main church and then with outside of the church around the world?
I don't have exact numbers, but approximately there's about 90 local members in the headquarters. That comes and goes. People come, people leave. Some folks visit from out of town. So around 90 here in Wadsworth attend, and that's Wadsworth, but then in the local area, if they're within like a 2-hour driving distance, they come to headquarters. As far as worldwide, I think the last I heard was that there were 1,500 baptized members.
Okay.
But that could mean somebody who's married, whose spouse is not baptized, or somebody has 10 kids.
Okay.
Those numbers, and that's like global. I think at its peak, when I was attending, the Restored Church of God got up to 3,500 members. And don't quote me on those numbers because I'm just basing it on recollection. I always thought, wow, we're really small, but we have this gigantic campus. And we have all these books and booklets, and we have these wonderful World to Come television. Wow, it's a little flock doing a great work. And that's kind of like the tagline that we would hear.
Now, on the outside, how many countries are members of the Restored Church of God?
I'd have to go to the website. I think there's like 60 different countries, but it's right there when you go to the RCG landing page, down in the About Us stuff, those types of things. Congregations all over the world in 60 countries. We have X amount of literature and X amount of videos. So if people were really interested in the real numbers, they can just go to the website.
Now, do these members in the other countries that have the congregations, do they send in money to the Restored Church of God?
And I have to be careful how I say this because I don't know if this is the how-tos that the non-disclosure agreement talks about. But basically, every member pays tithes to, let's say Belgium. There's the Restored Church of God in Belgium that a minister is overseeing. Like any church, you pay your tithes and offerings to the church. How the money is sent and how much is sent from the local areas, I don't know. I can only speculate in, there's local costs for hall rentals and different types of events and things that, are outside the purview of the local congregation. How that works, I'm not quite sure. But of course, all the money at some point gets back to Restored here in Wadsworth. Just like in Apple, you can buy an Apple computer in China, but somehow the money gets back to California where Apple is. So it's basically the same thing.
Now, does RCG have a mission statement?
They probably do, but I don't know it.
Okay.
It's just preaching the gospel, something or other about preaching the gospel.
Now, next question says, they say they'll let anyone worship with them as long as they have the same belief. But what does that mean? What is the different beliefs that RCG has compared to somebody who's like, say, Catholic or Methodist?
Well, mostly RCG is a Sabbath-keeping, Bible-believing, Jesus Christ is the Son of God church, Christian church. It's Christian in many ways, and I guess you could say it's nuanced, but it's also the difference between night and day when somebody worships on Sunday versus worships on Saturday. The Old Testament holy days are still kept because that was the pattern actually in the New Testament. So the holy days, the Sabbath, that's probably the biggest difference. And that's why people, when you explain, if you're in a COG or Worldwide or any of them, oh, you're a Jew. Like I went to Israel for the feast one year, and they asked me, oh, so what are you doing here? Oh, I'm here for the Feast of Tabernacles. And they're like, oh, you're a Jew. I'm like, no, I'm a Christian. It's like, yeah, but that's Jewish. I got into almost a discussion with the guy at the border about whether I was a Christian or a Jew.
Okay.
So a lot of the Jewish beliefs that are based on, the scriptures, that's what RCG teaches.
So basically, you don't celebrate Christmas or Easter.
No, those are pagan. Don't believe in the Trinity. That's a pagan creation. We keep the clean and unclean food laws, no pork, no shellfish, certain birds. They're very, very listed. Basically what Jews would eat, members of RCG would eat.
So if your faith is Bible-based, which version of the Bible does RCG prefer?
The King James, the Old King James.
The Old King James,
yeah.
Okay. And when do you have church services?
On the Sabbath. Or on the holy days. If there's a holy day, let's say Pentecost or Unleavened Bread or a Feast of Tabernacles, those types of things, there's usually 2 services. On the Day of Atonement, where you're fasting, there's 1 service. And those services are around 2 hours.
Now, for those that don't understand what the Sabbath is, can you explain that? Because most people are assuming, okay, Sabbath, that's everybody goes to church on a Sunday.
Right. The Sabbath is the 7th day. God rested on the 7th day in the book of Genesis, and also the commandment is remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. That's part of the 4th commandment. Now, what is the Sabbath? Saturday or Sunday, there are books and scholars and historians who've tried to say it doesn't matter or it drifted. The way I understood it is that the Jews are the keepers of the Sabbath, and the Sabbath are the keeper of the Jews. So if the Jews today say that the Sabbath is Saturday, they are the authority by which we believe, and I'm sure that came from Herbert Armstrong's own personal research.
Now, you said when a sermon is going, it can be a couple hours. And when I was talking to you earlier this week, you mentioned that, when David Pack would have a sermon, that even all the employees on the property would stop what they're doing and still get paid and sit right down and have to listen to it for hours on end.
Yes. So the normal Sabbath services are 2 hours, but with Dave Pack's series that he's been doing for many years, they just did part 366 yesterday. He will speak from anywhere from an hour and a half to 3.5 hours. And that's sometimes 2, 3, 4 times a week. During the week, when he's speaking, the entire staff is brought into the main hall. Everybody dresses up, except for those that work outside. Sometimes they don't. And all employees are paid to sit and listen to him speak. So in effect, when David Pack speaks to the church employees, the work shuts down, but everybody's being paid to sit in the seat. And believe me, it's painful money to sit through.
Now, do they believe that Jesus is the Son of God? And when he returns, will he take all the believers or just themselves?
We believe that Jesus Christ, when I say we, I mean because sometimes I still speak as RCG, even though I haven't been attending for over a year. Jesus Christ is the Son of God. He was our Savior. He died for our sins. There's God the Father. And it depends on the perspective of what Dave Pack is teaching, how it's being done. Sometimes the Father comes first, sometimes Christ comes first, sometimes it's here, sometimes it's there. It fluctuates, which is another reason why I left. It's like you can't keep anything straight based on what the man is telling you. But Christ will come first to the members of the Restored Church of God, or come first to David C. Pack, and then to the members of the Restored Church of God. And then he will establish his kingdom on earth, and then open up the opportunity for everyone on the planet to understand God's way and live by his teachings and accept God, Jesus Christ, and be with them in their kingdom.
Now, at Restored Church of God, can you get a divorce? And is it true that if you are divorced, you must reconcile with your former spouse, and if you cannot, you must become celibate the remainder of your life?
If you are a member of the Restored Church of God and marry another member of Restored Church of God and are officiated, you cannot get divorced. If you get divorced, you're eunuchs for the gospel's sake. Now, the only way a marriage can be dissolved is based on biblical principle, and that is fraud. Jesus said, except for, I don't have the right words, but it means fraud. Then somebody can be divorced and marry again. But Jesus even said, if you're divorced and you marry another woman, you're committing adultery. So it depends on how strict or liberal they determine that is. But for the most part, if you're divorced before you come to Restored, in most cases, unless you've been divorced too many times, they'll let you marry again with ministerial counsel. But they advise against divorce because it really means if you divorce this other member, you're both eunuchs. That's it.
Are there arranged marriages? And the big one is underage marriages.
Absolutely not. They don't do anything illegal. They don't do anything illegal or improper or immoral when it comes to relationships. No, there's no prearranged anything.
Are there women employed by the church? And are women considered equal with men in the church?
Women are, based on biblical principles, submissive to men. Wives, submit to your husbands, Paul said. So there is a hierarchy where a man is always over a woman, period. And it doesn't mean like, oh, she has to walk 6 feet behind me, or I can beat her, or mistreat that person. It just means when there's important decisions in life, the man is the one that has the final say. How the kids are raised, if it needs to be, if we're buying this house or not, are we getting a new vehicle? The big decisions are ultimately up to the man to decide. However, and they've always taught this, that a wise man will listen to the counsel of his wife. And so men should listen to their wives, but they don't obey their wives. And yes, women do work at Restored Church of God. They work in various capacities with no preaching.
So you're a member in the church, you're not married. Do you have to get permission to date? Do they have to approve who you date? And the big one is, do they really have to approve who you marry?
Yes, on all those. Being single in the church and it being such a small church, you don't date outside the church, you don't date outside your race, and you don't date outside of your particular age range, unless, of course, you're a minister and then suddenly they find ways to, like, oh, that's okay. But yes, when you want to date somebody, if first, you're meeting at a party, when you're meeting or you like somebody and you start chatting, it's like, wow, I want to pursue this person, dating for courtship and marriage. You bring the ministry involved and say, hey, let them know, hey, I like so-and-so. I'd like to date her. Is that okay? And they can give you a yes or a no. And then if you start dating more and it starts getting serious and you're thinking about marriage, then you bring the ministry in and they will give you marriage counseling before you get married.
Now, I want to back up. One of the answers that you gave was no interracial marriage.
Correct.
That's going to hit hard for some people because in today's society, that's considered racist.
Correct.
So how can the church condone saying no interracial marriages?
There are hour-long sermons, like three or 4 hour-long sermons that could answer that question more precisely. I'll just give you the broad stroke of it. From my understanding of what I heard is that it was in line with the biblical teaching of the tribes of Israel staying separate, so that God wanted blacks to be blacks, white to be whites, Asians to be Asians, Hispanic to be Hispanic, and didn't want a blending of the races. And so what Restored does, which is unlike the other COGs, which don't seem to care about interracial, is that they're trying to follow the way that they think God intended, that whites are only with whites, blacks are only with blacks. And so they don't allow, you can go off and marry who you want, you just don't have to be a member anymore.
And so what happens if you come to the church and you're already in an interracial marriage? Are they going to separate you?
No, it's you be content in the state from which you were called. So if people are already interracial, they have interracial children, they welcome them like anybody else. There's a lot of interracial couples in RCG, at least there were when I was there. And, you accept them as they are because that's the way God called you. The church does not split up families. It does not split up couples. It doesn't say you have to divorce or you have to, they don't do that in RCG.
Okay. Now, we talked about, and we'll go further in more episodes, you talked about in regards to the Philadelphia splinter and that they were more strict. So when it comes to interracial marriages or somebody who is not a member of the church, how do they handle that?
From my understanding, because I've never been a member of PCG, Philadelphia Church of God, run by Gerald Flurry, if you are put out of the church, members in the church have to sever contact even with family members. RCG is not nearly as extreme as that. They won't split up families or make you get a divorce or put pressure. Like if you're married and your husband leaves, RCG minister is not going to tell you, wow, you need to leave that guy. From my understanding, PCG does. But when you leave the Restored Church of God, they tell the members to sever the friendships that they have with people who have left. Some people do that. I never did. I would still keep contact with some people loosely. I even went out to dinner from time to time with people that were former members. That never felt quite right to me, and I felt if we're supposed to be a light, then why not, how can you be a light if you put the lamp under the bushel, which is severing that friendship? You never know when that person might want to turn around and come back, and that, wow, talking to this person really made me realize I should stay. It almost never happens. But currently RCG says, and they put pressure on people recently in recent sermons, those people who leave are Antichrist. You cannot be friends with them. If you do, you're sinning. And so because of that, they have a crisis of conscience. And I certainly don't want to be the one causing somebody's conscience to be pricked. So if somebody was like starting to feel squeamish about me being in contact with them, I respect their feeling because I was there, and you kind of leave them alone voluntarily.
Okay, now we're going to get into another topic of questions that I've seen for years. And before doing this interview, did a lot of research, got through a lot of contacts so that I could give evidence to people based on the answers that I got. One of the big things that people asked is, before building in Wadsworth, did you have to get prior approval for building in the community? And if so, was it the city council who voted for the approval or the mayor? And how are they able to pick the location? And they want to know, why didn't the city investigate? I have a slide to show everybody that I will post later for people to see. This document right here is all of the permits. It started in 2008. These are all the permits from the city to the county that were signed, that were stamped. Yes, they had to get approval. There was no underhanding. There was no sliding of the money to the mayor. It was all legitimate. The other document for which, I don't know if I got a slide for it, but this is the development guide for commercial and industrial. Okay, this is what everybody in the city has to go ahead and follow. I will also provide that. They followed everything to the T. If there was something to be found, it would have been found. When you do look up at, if you would look for the permits, you're going to see every signature on these. As much as everybody wants to find a conspiracy theory on this, listen, if you're the county auditor and you're the mayor, listen, you want it to be legitimate. So unfortunately, there's nothing behind here. The other thing is again, I looked. In 2008 is when they start having surveys and looking at things. Restored Church of God had a hookup to the city water, the sewer, the gas companies had to be involved. It all had to be taken care of properly. Plus, you have to remember, next to Giant Eagle is the big power, okay? So that was a whole other issue that Restored Church of God had to get around. One other document that it will show you that you can go on and look, I attached hyperlinks, is this document in regards to the properties, all right? There is, yes, like 26 some properties. And one of the questions is off to the side, you'll see the parcel number, all right? That's hyperlink. That's where you can click to actually look at the property and if taxes are paid. Now, there are several houses along 261 and up along the side. Those are all houses. All of those were paid for by the Restored Church of God. And looking, yes, they all pay taxes. They are not considered non-exempt. You mentioned that those who live in those houses have to pay, actually.
They're paying rent.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
In regards to the larger buildings where the Church of Worship and all that is, yes, that is tax exempt. Now, was anybody forced out of their home? Were they threatened?
As far as I know, no. They were actually paid well for the properties.
Yes.
And actually people would contact the church, which happened after the recent Facebook posting. Somebody wrote to me and said, how can I sell my property to RCG? So the homeowners around the area up 261 and Hartman usually are the ones that contact RCG and say, hey, we want to sell. But there have been cases when RCG has asked the owners, and maybe that's where this rumor started, would you like to sell? And some people at the time were like, no, they don't want to sell, until eventually they do. Because eventually it's like manifest destiny around the campus that they want to have all the property along 261 up to Hartman and from Hartman to the freeway.
Okay. One of the things that was discussed is, again, why wasn't there an investigation? There can't be an investigation because it's a church. There was nothing underhanded for them to do. They went about the surveys like everybody else. If the city would have come and said, I'm sorry, you can't build, we think that you're a cult, there would be a massive lawsuit. That would be for defamation of character and also going ahead and think about it, that would be discrimination.
It's a violation of the First Amendment.
Yes, so that's why that wasn't there. Also in regards to why quickly does it had to be so extravagant? People don't understand when you go to a regular church around town, because we have plenty around the country, but why does it have to be so extravagant? Rumors of chandeliers inside, gold plated.
Those aren't rumors, those are all true. The reason that I, as a member, I had a question like, why are we spending so much money on wooden walls and furniture and fixtures? And it was explained to me that God is a God of quality. And following along what they would call the grand pattern from the Worldwide Church of God and Herbert W. Armstrong, that church spent a lot of money on, you could call it, extravagant things. And so the way it was explained to me is that if you are going to have world leaders coming to Wadsworth to visit the campus, because we were told that the campus would be the hub of where God is working on the earth,
okay.
You're going to have presidents, ambassadors coming from all over the country. They need to see the beautiful campus,
okay.
inside and out. And also there was a biblical principle that supported that, which is that even the temple in Israel was plated in gold. Solomon took tons of gold and inlaid the entire temple with gold. So there is a biblical precedent for what you consider opulence.
Now I have a slide of the property showing where all the property is, as you can see. Now, that's outlined. That's where all the property is, especially on the inside. However, if you go on the Medina County website for the county auditor, you will see if you click around on each property, it'll show a parcel. Not all of those parcels are owned by the Restored Church of God. There is actually a large chunk of land in between and around that is not owned by the Restored Church of God. Now the question is why did they have to have a private access road off to the side besides just going in through 261 next to Giant Eagle? Isn't that a little mysterious, having this little road with the little gate?
Well, when you have a piece of property that stretches about a half mile by a quarter mile-ish, hundreds of acres, it becomes impractical to only have one way in. And if I believe right, somebody who was involved in RCG can tell me this at the time, but I think that the county or the city required another access for safety reasons so that emergency vehicles could get into the campus.
Well, wait a minute. If they're gated, one of the questions is do they have access to even get on the property if there's an emergency? I mean, it looks like they have a gate and they're trying to keep everybody out, but somebody said that when they worked for the city on the fire department, they weren't able to get in. There was no access.
From my understanding that all emergency vehicles have access or codes to the gate to be able to get in. I was working late one night in the summertime and the police showed up at the front door of the building by themselves. Nobody escorted them. They just showed up. And I was like, okay, well then clearly somebody has access. How that works, I mean, if a person at the fire department said this or that, I don't want to counter what they said. But from my understanding, emergency vehicles can get on the campus. And regardless, that gate just blocks the street. There is grass and a sidewalk this way and grass sidewalk that way. If somebody wants to hop the curb, they can get in the gate in 10 seconds.
Now, in my research, what I discovered is there was nothing underhanded with the city, with the county. They're paying the taxes on the houses. You can go ahead and look when you want to look at in regards to the properties. I attached several links for you to go and find it yourselves as well. several millions of dollars in properties. However, I can't find anything in regards to the full financials. Now, there is one link that I have that I was able to kind of get around about, saying that they bring in close to $7 million a year. However, because they are a church entity and they're not filing the 990, you can't find anything. Now, I know a lot of the splinter churches go ahead and show their financials, but David Pack is not showing anything. That's right. One of the things that I found that it just doesn't seem right, because you can't find out exactly where all the money goes, because they don't do anything in the city. They don't do any volunteering. From talking to you, they don't seem to just go out and help members. They're kind of like, well, here's some welfare services for you to go ahead and find. Try to do everything before we have to give you any money. So you got this huge campus. You got these big buildings that don't have anybody in them. And then to come to find out, it's because David Pack believes at the end of times, Restored Church of God is going to be the center for the whole world to come. Mm-hmm. All these other splinter churches, the president, the queen, they're all going to come to Wadsworth, Ohio, and he's going to be the one to be with Jesus. That's what it comes down to.
Yes.
That's how people feel, and they use the label, and I'm not going to use this loosely because that's another debate on a cult. Now, some define cult as in you don't believe in the Trinity, but there's a problem there because there are several religions, several faiths that don't. So that would make too many cults out there in the world. But what I have found is there's certain characteristics, not of the members, okay? The members are harmless. But David Pack saying that he is the apostle, some people refer to it as the prophet, but he says he's not, that Jesus speaks directly to him, that Restored Church of God is the #1 church in the world that Jesus is going to come to. Does that not scare you? Is that not upsetting that he feels and thinks this way? I mean, I don't think that he's delusional. I feel that he honestly believes this because he's constantly saying the end of times.
Well, there's a lot to unpack with what you just said. I'll try to take it in small compartments. Going back, the buildings aren't empty. There's a lot more space than there are employees, and that was by design. That because when the work of God does come to the campus, does come to the Restored Church of God, that then there would be a need to fill the buildings.
Okay.
So they were overbuilt.
Overbuilt.
With the idea that when Christ comes and starts ruling on the earth from Wadsworth, with David C. Pack being his apostle, his Elijah, his Joshua, his voice to the world, that you'd need more people to do some of the physical labor that needed to be done.
Okay.
No, it didn't scare me because we were the true church. All the other churches out there, like these booklets here, like, where's the true church?
Okay.
The true church is the Restored Church of God. And what this book does is goes through the history and then ends through, everything goes through Herbert Armstrong. And then comes to Dave Pack through Global and then creating the Restored Church of God.
Okay.
So no, it's not scary. It's exciting and wonderful to think that God is coming to where I worship, is going to use me personally to help usher in the kingdom of God and help the millions of people who are suffering all over the world. How would that be scary? That would be exciting. That would be giving your whole life purpose and meaning that you couldn't find anywhere else. And that's what I believed, and that's what the people who are still there believe. And they're not making this stuff up, as far as there are verses that are there that say some of these things. Christ is coming. The Father is going to send his Son. Jesus Christ is a Savior. There is going to be a world government. There's going to be world peace. There's going to be calamity, like you see in Revelation. That's all true, but what's not true is how David C. Pack frames it and mixes it up and keeps changing it. And that's the stuff that's scary. That's the stuff that's confusing, and that was the reason I left. And people should be more concerned about what David C. Pack is teaching and how he's teaching it and how he's changing it and how it just never ends and how even the Bible proves that he's false. And yet he's still preaching as of yesterday. There are still members who stay there. So that to me is the more scary part of it.
Okay.
Not that, do you believe that Christ is coming and working with him? Christ is going to come and work with a people. It's not necessarily the corporation of the Restored Church of God, but that is the true church in its corporate form for legal reasons. But all those that have God's Spirit will eventually be the ones who work with Christ to help preach the gospel to the entire world.
Now, on financials, how does, this is the biggest question, the tithing, the financials that the members, parishioners give to the church?
There are 3 tithes. The first, people who know that will know, they'll get a laugh at that. There are three tithes in the Bible. The first tithe is a tithe is 10%.
Okay.
10% of your income. RCG teaches it's 10% of your gross, not 10% of your net, that you give to the church. Just right off the top, you write a check. Every time you get a paycheck, you write 10% and you give it.
Okay.
And then there's the second tithe, which is for a personal savings account of 10% of your income. That's for traveling to the Feast of Tabernacles every fall. Think of it as a Christian vacation for about 10 days.
Okay.
You need money to pay for the hotel and have a food, and you're supposed to have whatever your heart desires. So people will put themselves up in nice hotels. They'll go to the finest restaurants. You're celebrating God's way and God's holy days, but you need that income of 10% that you keep personally for your second tithe.
Okay.
Ministers are different, but then that's getting into the how-tos, but it is different for lay members and ministers. The one thing that RCG teaches is that at the end of the feast, you're supposed to turn in your what they call excess second tithe. So if I saved up, let's say $5,000, and I only spent $3,000, RCG wants you to give the other $2,000 back to them. That's not in the Bible. That's not in the scriptures. I never did that. What I did was I kept that second tithe in the savings account, and it got a little bigger over time each year. Or one year I need a plane ticket, another year I didn't, so I spent more. And then there's the third tithe, which is once every 3 years, where it's another 10% that you save for the widow, for the Levite, and for the orphan. That is where third tithe assistance comes in. You mentioned earlier about assistance to some members. It's called asking for third tithe assistance for people who are members of the church that need financial help. They can apply for third tithe assistance, but the church will do everything it can to make sure that the government programs are in place, spend money before the church writes them a check. And the question about the campus, it didn't really come from tithes. That's not enough. I think even, let's say 5,000 people making $100,000 a year per person, which is not true, take 10% of that and they still would not have been able to afford the campus. The reason the Restored Church of God has been able to afford the campus is a financial teaching called common. And you mentioned common to somebody in Restore, they know exactly what you're talking about. In the book of Acts, when the church was first created, there's a passage in there that talks that the brethren had all things common, meaning everybody pooled their money together to help build the church. What David Pack has done is take that teaching to be, you give all you can to the church, and it's a test of faith. You don't need 2 homes. You don't need necessarily 2 cars. Oh, you have a boat. Do you really need that boat? Wow, you fly an airplane. Do you need an airplane? Oh, you have property. You're going to sell that. That's where the campus comes from. It comes from common. And before the campus was bought in 2 parts, where the buildings are now, and then what we call the land, which is after what's now called Ambassador Drive, all the way, deep almost up to Hartman. That land was supposed to be farmland, and there was a big push by the ministry and David Pack to get members to give extra.
Which is this?
That was going to be the vision. Mr. Dale Schurter, just a wonderful, wonderful, knowledgeable man, just a real minister, a wonderful human being.
So there's no farming on there. That was the big talk, is that there was going to be self-sufficient farm animals.
Right. That kind of didn't come to pass for various reasons, but there is a community garden that they have for the members to be able to enjoy. But there's a lot of land that's kind of just open right now, and that at one point David Pack started teaching that the mountain city will come out of heaven and land in Wadsworth. And he had slides and measurements and showed how the biblical measurement of Ezekiel measuring the temple, or was John, I can't remember which now, maybe it was both, it fits perfectly between 261, Hartman, and the highway. So it would have been a great fit for the mountain city to come out of heaven and be the base of operation. And that's why we never developed the land. That's why the agriculture program went away, was that to leave room for Christ to come.
So do people, when we were talking, when you become a member, obviously, is it like they vet you to find out what you have? I mean, do they have to hand over their life insurance, or, how does that all work?
They will vet everyone to find out what their financials are. That is not a requirement. Like, they don't weed people out because they don't have any money, or they're a widow who lives at home and has a wheelchair. They will, if that person, God's opening their eyes, they will invite that person. It's those with substance that RCG needs. People that have big houses, bank accounts, multiple houses, summer home, property, those type of things. And they will, after a time, start introducing, well, do you know about our common teaching? Oh, you should listen to these sermons. They don't tell you, here, give us this much, or they stand over your shoulder and tell you what you do. They give you the information you need and let your own conscience guide you about how much excess you have. The more you have, the more RCG will depend on you. And I have talked to people that had a lot of pressure put on them. Hey, we understand you're selling property. How much can we count on you pledging to us? And they will budget next year based upon how much is being pledged. And there was one point where a member was selling his house and told the headquarters minister, I'm going to pay this much. But then the local minister somehow got involved, and because that member was worried about losing his wife over the financials. And so that minister counseled him, well, give her what she wants, but still give the rest of the church.
Okay.
I watched Dave Pack get so angry and call out this minister in the audience for losing the church over $100,000. Rather than seeing it, and this speaks to the man himself and how he thinks, rather than seeing it that the church got $250,000, that this person's meddling cost the church $100,000. Those numbers aren't precise, but that's an illustration of the kind of things that go on. They want your money, and they're not going to tell you to do it. They're not going to tell you how much, but they'll preach around it, and they'll counsel you, and what can you afford? Do you really need this? Do you really need that? And that's how the campus has gotten built. You have to pay for the campus. You have to pay for the loans. You have to buy trees. You have to buy horses. How that does the work, I don't know. But you got to keep the machine going. And so by preaching, all this literature gets new people to come into the church, get really excited, write a fat check, and then they're there for a while and going, wow, what I'm hearing from the pulpit is not what I'm reading in the books. And that's correct. And that's one of the problems I had too. Every minister at Restored Church of God knows a lot of this literature is, quote, out of date. If it's really bad, they pull it. It's not even there anymore. I have books and booklets that they don't even have anymore because it's so not what they teach anymore. They don't have the time or the bandwidth to keep changing literature week after week after week because the teachings change week after week. So you kind of just leave it out there knowing it's false, which to me, that's kind of bait and switch. I'm not a lawyer, but how is that telling somebody something is one thing and then they come in and learn it's something else? People walk out the door, which is why there's a high turnover rate at RCG.
Okay. And
so but as long as the person's there long enough to learn about common, write a big fat check, and then leave, and it's like, okay, well, we got $50,000 out of the person, we got $100,000. Sometimes people have given up to $250,000, and you only need 1 or 2 people a year to do that, to keep the machine going.
Well, as you can tell, we have a lot of material. And I know there's a lot of questions that we didn't get to for people, but like I said, we're trying to break it down the best that we can. I encourage you, if you have more questions, please ask them. We will try to get them the best that we can. And I understand we're not going to get everything answered for everyone. Tune in next time. Mark and I will try to take you back on some more answers and questions, explaining things in a little bit more detail for you. And thank you for tuning in. Thank you, Mark, for coming on this show and doing with me, trying to help educate the public. If I can say anything before I go, it is please get your facts straight. look into something, ask people questions, you know, from the church. They're good people. It's just unfortunately with the financials, the common, and David Pack's teachings that it's gone screw. I invite any former member. I even invite David Pack to come onto the show and talk. So
good luck.
Again, thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
You are watching WCTV, Wadsworth Community Television.